In the summer of 1944, German intelligence officers reported something extraordinary. An entire American division, thousands of troops, hundreds of tanks, and artillery batteries had been spotted near the French coast. Wehrmacht commanders scrambled to reinforce their positions, redirecting valuable resources to counter this formidable threat. But there was one problem. That division didn't exist. What the Germans had encountered was perhaps the most creative military unit of World War II, a secret army of artists, sound engineers, and designers who fought the war not with bullets, but with inflatable tanks, recorded sound effects, and theatrical deception. Today, we're going to explore the remarkable story of the Ghost Army, a classified unit that remained secret for nearly 50 years after the war ended. By 1943, Allied planners faced a critical challenge. The invasion of Europe would require unprecedented coordination, and every advantage mattered. Military deception was nothing new, from the Trojan horse to Napoleon's phantom divisions, but modern warfare demanded modern solutions. The British had already pioneered visual deception in North Africa, where they'd used dummy tanks to fool Rommel's Afrika Korps. American military intelligence took note. What if deception could be elevated to an art form? What if you could create entire phantom armies that looked, sounded, and even felt real to enemy observers? In January 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was activated. The unit's official designation was deliberately vague, designed to deflect curiosity. What made this unit truly unique wasn't just its mission, but its personnel. The Army recruiters had gone to art schools. They'd sought out designers from advertising agencies, radio sound engineers, and even fashion illustrators. Men who in civilian life had painted billboards or designed window displays for department stores were now tasked with fooling German intelligence. The unit consisted of approximately 1,100 men organized into four main sections. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers handled visual deception. The 3,132nd Signal Service Company managed radio deception. The Signal Company Special created sonic deception. And the 406th Combat Engineers provided security and practical support. Their commander, Colonel Harry Reeder, understood that this unconventional unit required unconventional thinking. Unlike traditional military operations that relied on firepower and force, the Ghost Army would wage psychological warfare. Their weapon was illusion, and their battlefield was the German mind. Training began immediately. The men learned to inflate rubber tanks and artillery pieces that, from a distance, looked remarkably authentic. They studied how to create fake tire tracks and footprints to simulate the movement of large formations. Sound engineers developed a library of recorded battlefield noises, the rumble of tank columns, the clatter of bridge-building equipment, the general din of an army on the move. But perhaps most importantly, they learned something that would prove crucial to their success: attention to detail. A carelessly placed inflatable tank or an inconsistent radio transmission could expose the entire operation. In the world of military deception, the smallest mistake could cost lives. The Ghost Army's arsenal was unlike anything else in the European theatre. Let me walk you through their remarkable toolkit. Visual deception. The inflatable tanks were engineering marvels. Made of rubberized canvas, a single Sherman tank dummy weighed just 85 pounds and could be inflated by two men in about 5 minutes. From ground level at 200 yards, they were nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. The unit carried inflatable artillery pieces, tank destroyers, reconnaissance vehicles, and even trucks. But the illusion extended beyond the hardware itself. The men created entire mock bivouacs, complete with laundry hanging on lines, fake command posts with antennas, and carefully positioned vehicles. They understood that German reconnaissance aircraft wouldn't just photograph equipment, they'd look for signs of human activity. So the Ghost Army provided it. They'd hang wet clothes to dry. They'd create pathways through fields showing the natural wear of foot traffic. They'd even position a few real vehicles among the fakes to add authenticity. Sonic deception. This was perhaps the most innovative aspect of their operation. The Sonic Deception Unit had recorded various battlefield sounds onto phonograph records. These weren't simple recordings. They were carefully orchestrated audio landscapes. Using armored vehicles equipped with powerful amplifiers and speakers, they could project these sounds up to 15 miles away. Imagine sitting in a German observation post at night, hearing what sounded like dozens of tanks moving into position, hearing the metallic clank of treads, the rumble of engines, the voices of commanders, all of it a carefully crafted illusion broadcast through the darkness. The sonic unit had over 20 different sound effects, and they could mix them in real time to create specific scenarios. A tank battalion arriving, engineers building a bridge, artillery moving into position. The Germans would hear an army preparing for battle and adjust their defenses accordingly. Radio deception. Perhaps the most subtle form of their craft was radio deception. The unit's radio operators would mimic the communication patterns of genuine American divisions. Every division had its own distinctive radio fingerprint: the frequency of transmissions, the style of operators, the volume and pattern of traffic. The Ghost Army's radio men would study a real division's communication patterns, then replicate them perfectly while operating miles away. To German signals intelligence, it would appear that an entire division had relocated to a new sector. They'd transmit orders, request supplies, report positions, creating a complete narrative of a unit that existed only in the electromagnetic spectrum. The Ghost Army conducted over 20 major tactical deceptions during the war. Let me share some of their most significant operations. Operation Viersen, March 1945. One of their most successful missions occurred as Allied forces prepared to cross the Rhine River. The Ghost Army was tasked with concealing the actual location of the Ninth Army's crossing while creating the illusion of a major operation elsewhere. They set up near Viersen, Germany, simulating two full divisions preparing for an assault crossing. Inflatable tanks appeared in assembly areas. Radio traffic exploded with activity. At night, the sonic units broadcast the sounds of bridge construction equipment. Meanwhile, the real Ninth Army was preparing to cross at a different location. German artillery and reinforcements moved toward the Ghost Army's fake concentration, exactly as planned. When the actual crossing began, German resistance was lighter than expected because resources had been diverted to counter a threat that didn't exist. The operation was a textbook example of their craft. For 4 days, they maintained the illusion, tying up German forces while real American units achieved their objectives with fewer casualties. The Luxembourg Deception, January 1945. During the Battle of the Bulge, the Ghost Army faced perhaps its greatest challenge. With the German offensive creating chaos across the front, the 23rd was tasked with covering the withdrawal and redeployment of real combat units. They set up positions to simulate the 75th Infantry Division and the 90th Infantry Division, creating the impression that these forces were still in their original positions even as they moved to counter the German advance. For a week, the Ghost Army maintained this fiction, operating dangerously close to German lines. The risk was real. If German forces had attacked what they thought was a full division and discovered it was barely 1,000 men with rubber tanks, the results would have been catastrophic. The Ghost Army troops carried weapons and were prepared to fight if discovered, but their real protection was the believability of their deception. It worked. German intelligence reports from that period show they believed they were facing full-strength divisions. The real units were able to redeploy without German commanders realizing they had a potential opportunity to exploit a weakness in the Allied line. Operation Brest, August-September 1944. After the breakout from Normandy, the Ghost Army simulated the presence of the 2nd Armored Division, convincing German forces that a major unit was threatening Brest from the south. This tied up German defenders while the actual assault came from a different direction. What made this operation particularly noteworthy was the use of special effects, troops who would drive through nearby French towns in real jeeps and trucks, sporting the distinctive patches and markings of the Second Armored. They'd deliberately engage with French civilians and make sure they were seen. The Ghost Army understood that human intelligence, local French residents reporting to German forces, was as important as aerial reconnaissance or signals intelligence. By being visible in nearby towns, ordering supplies, asking directions, even patronizing local establishments, they created a human dimension to their deception. French civilians would naturally report seeing American troops with Second Armored insignia. This intelligence would filter back to German commanders, reinforcing what their aerial reconnaissance and signals intelligence already suggested. A major American armored formation was in the area. Operation Vierson's human element asterisk. What often made these operations successful wasn't just the technology, it was the soldiers' commitment to their roles. Officers from the Ghost Army would visit Allied headquarters in nearby towns, making sure they wore patches of the divisions they were simulating. They'd attend briefings, be seen at officers' clubs, and generally maintain the visible presence of a unit's command staff. Enlisted men would do the same in their sphere. They go to nearby French or Belgian towns on leave, wearing the appropriate unit patches, talking about their unit in ways that would seem natural but would be overheard. Every interaction was theatre, every conversation a performance. One Ghost Army veteran later recalled, "We were always on stage. Even when we were technically off duty, we had to maintain the character of whatever unit we were impersonating. It was exhausting, but we knew lives depended on how well we played our parts." While the Ghost Army never engaged in direct combat as a unit, their work was far from safe. They operated close to enemy lines, often within range of German artillery. Several men were killed or wounded during operations, casualties of a war they fought with art and deception rather than firearms. The psychological strain was also significant. These men knew that if their deception failed, real combat units would pay the price. If German forces discovered the ruse and realized they were facing rubber tanks and recorded sounds, they could quickly overwhelm the position and exploit the gap in Allied lines. Every operation carried the weight of potential disaster. There was also a peculiar loneliness to their service. They couldn't discuss their work with soldiers from other units. Postcards and letters home were heavily censored. Even decades after the war, many Ghost Army veterans felt they'd served in obscurity, their contributions unknown and unrecognized. Unlike infantry units that could share war stories or bomber crews that could describe missions, the men of the Ghost Army lived with secrets. They'd been sworn to silence about their operations, and the official classification meant their story remained hidden for nearly 50 years. Yet they persisted, conducting operation after operation, refinement after refinement of their craft. They became masters of a peculiar form of warfare, one that required artistic vision, technical skill, and psychological insight. The unit served from January 1944 until November 1945, conducting operations across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. They're credited with helping to save an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 Allied lives through their deceptions, though the exact figure is impossible to calculate with certainty. For decades after the war ended, the Ghost Army's story remained classified. The men returned to civilian life, carrying extraordinary memories they couldn't share. Many returned to careers in art and design. One became a famous fashion illustrator, another a renowned painter, others went into advertising and television. It wasn't until 1996 that their story was finally declassified. When historians began piecing together the unit's operations, they were astounded by the scope and sophistication of what these men had accomplished. Here was a unit that had waged psychological warfare with an artist's eye for detail and a theatre director's understanding of spectacle. In 2013, a documentary film brought their story to wider public attention. Veterans of the unit, now in their late 80s and 90s, could finally discuss their wartime service openly. The response was overwhelming. People were fascinated by this unique chapter of military history, a unit of artists who'd gone to war armed with creativity and deception. The Ghost Army's legacy extends beyond their specific operations. They demonstrated that warfare isn't solely about firepower and brute force. Strategic thinking, psychological understanding, and innovative approaches can be just as valuable as tanks and artillery. Modern military deception operations owe much to the techniques pioneered by these soldier artists. In 2022, Congress finally awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors. It was a recognition that came late for many of the men. Most had already passed away, but it acknowledged their extraordinary contribution to the Allied victory. Their story reminds us that victory in war requires diverse talents. The men who painted advertisements and designed stage sets proved just as essential as those who flew bombers or commanded tank divisions. They fought with imagination and artistry, and in doing so, they saved countless lives. The next time you see a World War II documentary showing massive tank formations or artillery batteries preparing for battle, you might wonder, were those real? The Germans wondered the same thing, and often enough they guessed wrong. The Ghost Army proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the one that fires the biggest shell. It's the one that exists only in the enemy's mind. These men fought with inflatable rubber, recorded sounds, and radio transmissions. They waged war with creativity and artistry, turning the battlefield into a stage and military deception into an art form. Their story remained hidden for 5 decades, but now we can finally appreciate their remarkable contribution to the Allied victory. They were soldiers who never fired a shot in anger, yet their actions helped bring the war to a close and saved thousands of lives. The Ghost Army, America's secret weapon of art and illusion. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more stories from World War II history. And if you have a relative who served in the Ghost Army or remember hearing about them, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below.